China released reports in August 2025 that their military had driven away the U.S. destroyer Higgins near Scarborough Shoal, a remote reef in the South China Sea that's been the center for territorial disputes. But the U.S. has another story to tell. As accusations flew between Washington and Beijing, the incident raised urgent questions. Which version is accurate? What are the legal stakes? And how does this tie into China's broader moves in the region? Let's explore the facts so far, the competing claims, and what you need to know. The world sat on the edge of its seat when China's Southern Command publicly said that the Higgins, a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer, had entered the waters near Scarborough Shoal without approval of the Chinese government. According to China, its military forces then responded by monitoring, warning, tracking, and then expelling the U.S. warship. Basically, China says that it scared away the American ship from its waters. It went on to accuse the operation of being a violation of its sovereignty and added that it undermined peace and stability in the South China Sea. In fact, Beijing didn't only say that Higgins' passage was unauthorized, but also that it encroached upon waters that Beijing considers its own. The Chinese statement makes it look like they were reclaiming control over what it says is its maritime domain, but the U.S. didn't exactly see it that way. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet immediately responded, calling China's version false, and saying that Higgins was conducting a freedom of navigation operation that's consistent with international law before departing on its own. The U.S. is saying that the operation was meant to assert navigational rights and freedoms, especially under the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and customary international law. These are rights that allow ships to sail within territorial seas under certain conditions and are also called innocent passage. The U.S. uses this to challenge what it calls excessive maritime claims. 7th Fleet spokeswomen also made it clear that Higgins remained within what the U.S. considers legal boundaries, and it left when it chose to. The U.S. is claiming that they were not forced out by China but left because they wanted to. But why is this event so important? Many people are confused because the U.S. and China don't agree on one thing: the country Scarborough Shoal belongs to. Well, to understand that, some history and geography are essential. Scarborough Shoal, called Huangyang Island in China, and Panatag, or Bajo de Mainslok in the Philippines, is a reef or atoll located about 200 kilometers off the Philippines. Its lagoon and reef are very rich in marine resources and are strategically located in the South China Sea. Ever since 2012, China has been controlling the shoal by force, even if the Philippines and Taiwan also claim that it belongs to them. What's more, in 2016, an international arbitration tribunal that pitched the Philippines and China against each other ruled that China's claims to maritime zones under its 9-dash line have absolutely no legal basis. The tribunal also condemned the actions by China, including the fact that it's been blocking the Scarborough Shoal from other countries, saying that it's violating international law. But China is rejecting this decision. With all these claims over an important region, Scarborough Shoal is usually a point of tension. So the U.S. is saying China couldn't have forced them out because the shoal doesn't belong to them in the first place, and that they were engaged in innocent passage. But China is saying that the U.S. infringed on its sovereignty by going into its waters. Still, there are several concrete facts to keep in mind when checking the credibility of each side's claims. For one, Higgins was not alone. The U.S. deployed 2 warships, the destroyer USS Higgins and the littoral combat ship USS Cincinnati. What's more, the Higgins reportedly passed within about 13 nautical miles of Scarborough Shoal. This distance is close to what many view as the edge of territorial waters claimed by other coastal states under UNCLOS, although the exact baseline features matter. These details are very important because they can help us realize whether Higgins was inside the waters that China says it owns, whether it gave notice or asked permission, although China said it didn't, and whether actions taken by China can be considered legal under international norms or law. But there's something else that's very important, and that's the timing. The incident occurred shortly after a supply mission by the Philippines to fishermen near the shoal, during which Philippines officials accused Chinese vessels of dangerous maneuvers and unlawful interference. On that same mission, 2 Chinese vessels actually collided while trying to intercept Philippine vessels. China claims its military scared Higgins away, but the US is saying otherwise. Still, this is just one among the several recent moves by China near Scarborough Shoal to show that it's asserting its control over the region. On August 11th, a Chinese Navy warship Gilan and a China Coast Guard cutter collided while pursuing the Philippine Coast Guard ship BRP Suluan, which was escorting Filipino fishermen and supplies. The Chinese ships allegedly tried to block the Filipino vessels. The Filipino authorities recently released the video of the collision, calling China's actions dangerous and hazardous. According to the Philippines, during that mission, Chinese vessels used water cannons against their boats. But China is sticking by its decision and is claiming that its vessels were enforcing its maritime laws, especially since it thinks the shoal and even the entire South China Sea belong to it, and says that the Philippines was intruding. The situation escalated further on August 13th when a Chinese jet intercepted a Philippine aircraft that was carrying journalists during a surveillance flight over or near Scarborough Shoal. The aircraft reported that the jet flew about 200 feet above the sea, and that Chinese Navy ships were ordering the Philippine plane by radio to vacate the area. Manila and Washington later responded to this, calling China's move reckless. These events are setting the scene. China is now very active in keeping Scarborough Shoal for itself, through physical, legal, or regulatory movements. It seems like the US went close to its waters at the wrong time, as China is sticking by its claim. In fact, China has approved a plan in September 2025 to designate the island as a national nature reserve. Since China has claimed it, despite the opposition from other countries, it says that it's going to protect this island to preserve biodiversity and ensure environmental stability. But the US and the Philippines argue that China's plan isn't pure. The Philippines are arguing that the reserve is a pretext for occupation and tighter control, limiting access to fishing grounds and restricting the traditional livelihoods of Filipino fishermen. Manila is protesting against China's plan, calling it illegitimate and unlawful, and accusing the most populous country of violating international law. The US is also speaking against this plan, calling it a coercive attempt by Beijing to solidify its sweeping territorial and maritime claims. The US has said that this undermines regional stability. Basically, for China, designating the shoal as a reserve under its government is just enough proof that it belongs to them. This is a pretty clever yet understated plan that gives the other countries no other room to claim the shoal. Most concerning to observers is that the area China intends to include in the reserve is ecologically significant and overlaps with zones traditionally accessed by Philippine fishermen. If enforced, the designation could give China more legal or de facto ability to exclude foreign vessels or control traffic under the guise of environmental protection. So, even if nature protection sounds good, it seems like China is making moves to control the area and eventually the entire South China Sea. Legal and policy experts are watching the current standoff between the US, the Philippines, and China, and understanding the competing claims requires knowing what international law says. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, coastal states may claim territorial seas up to 12 nautical miles from their baselines. Beyond that, there are exclusive economic zones, or EEZs, extending 200 nautical miles, where coastal states have rights over resources but not full sovereign control over navigation. Warships usually enjoy some rights of passage, one of which is the doctrine of innocent passage. It allows foreign vessels, including the military ones, to pass through territorial seas without giving a notification or asking for permission. But this is only as long as the warship has good intentions and won't affect peace, security, and order. The US is saying that Higgins is exercising this right, but China doesn't agree and contends that the notification or permission is still very important in certain waters. If not, how do you know the warship is peaceful or not until after it's in the territory? China also thinks that America's actions are undermining its sovereignty. What's more, the different Scarborough Shoal incidents like Higgins, collisions, and interceptions with the Philippines and the nature reserve proposal have proved that China is tightening control over this disputed area. This can increase friction in the area. Smaller states like the Philippines are finding it hard to use this area for fishing and resupply, especially if China wants to enforce reserve rules or assert stricter control over the vessels in the area. Manila has no power over China despite all its diplomatic protests. As for the U.S., it's been treating these incidents based on its own interpretation of maritime law. The U.S. standing, by its claim that it wasn't forced out, shows that it won't allow Washington to reinterpret the maritime law. The U.S. has made it clear who it's supporting and what its legal position is. America has been supporting the Philippines in protesting China's reserve plan. Washington is seeing Beijing's designation as a plan to reinforce its bold claim over the disputed maritime area, even at the expense of its neighbors. In the Higgins incident, U.S. officials emphasize innocent passage, freedom of navigation, and the principle that ships must be allowed to operate where international law allows. According to the U.S., Higgins followed these norms. The U.S. is also supporting other Southeast Asian countries to assert their rights, protesting actions seen as violations, and making public statements. The U.S. has decided that it won't accept the restrictions that China places on the region, especially since its claims are weak or contested. So, while China says it expelled USS Higgins, the U.S. is stating that the ship left under its own decision and wasn't scared off. What can't change is that Scarborough Shoal will offer benefits for the country it finally ends up with, like the natural resources and heavy shopping lanes. What do you think happened there? Was the U.S. scared off or left on its own? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on global military events.